weeks, but that's the way they wanted it explained to them.
The Emperor's faith provided comfort from the depressing fact that his country and people were now being governed by fascist Italian rule. It was for this cause that he relentlessly channeled all his energy and focus.
I have a memory where the Italians are there in their tank with their military, with their then up-to-date military equipment. And the Ethiopians are there with their spears and their horses. And there was a sense that there is no way that they're going to be able to combat that mechanistic sort of force. And although as a child, I couldn't quite take this on board, I could imagine now as an adult how desperate the emperor must have felt. I mean, so much courage, so much bravery, and so little ability, really, to defend yourself.
They had a rather magnificent radiogram, and someone put on a record. And immediately the whole place got into the sounds of what I presumed must be a battle, because there was gunfire, there was shouting, there was yelling, there was tremendous noise and racket. And it went on and it went on, and everybody looked so solemn, and I glanced round and everywhere here was looking very solemn. Now the emperor always sat with his hands on his knees like this, very relaxed. And his hands at the back, I'd already noticed, were very badly pocked, because he'd been, at some time the children told me, he'd been in a battle, and the Italians had used mustard gas, and some of it had gone on the back of the emperor's hands. And so he had these quite sizable dents. And I suddenly realized that the tears were rolling down his face and splashing onto these damaged hands. And although I was only 16, I thought that was terribly sad. But it was of great significance, and I think the memory of the emperor's tears will always stay with me.
Knowing help was needed, the emperor asked the world to take notice of his country's plight and demanded the League of Nations do the job it was created for in the first place, to secure peace.
It's one of the most dramatic moments in the history of the League of Nations, as the emperor without a kingdom, Haile Selassie, moves onto the rostrum to address the assembly. And it's marked by an unprecedented incident, when the Italian journalists in the gallery start a riot.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le... Haile Selassie's speech to the League in 1936 was unquestionably the most dramatic moment in the entire 20 years of the League's existence. And in it he posed the question, what is the security of small states worth if the League is unable to protect them?
Speaking in Amharic, the emperor says,
apart from the kingdom of the Lord, there is not on this earth any nation that is superior to any other. Should it happen that a strong government find it may with impunity destroy a weak people, then the hour strikes for that weak people to appeal to the League of Nations to give its judgment to all freedom. God and history will remember your judgment.
Very little happened at the time, because at that time the major Western European powers were all too anxious to appease the fascist dictators in the vain hope that it might prevent a major European war breaking out. So it was more of an embarrassment to his listeners, or to most of them, than an inspiration. But he posed the question, it is me today, will it be you tomorrow? And the answer to that question was yes.
His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia, descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, was a member of one of the oldest royal families in the history of the world. In 1935, Ethiopia, also known as Abyssinia, came under Italian attack and subsequent rule of the notorious fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. This plight resulted in the emperor and his family having to leave their country for exile in England. Due to political reluctance from the British government, the emperor sought refuge in the unsuspecting city of Bath. That was how the story began, and here the tale continues.
I used to meet him every morning. He'd smile at him, and he'd say good morning, isn't it a nice day, or maybe I said it. And I said to Mrs. Williamson, my landlady, after a while, who is that little man that always wears a cloak? And she said, oh, that's Haile Selassie. Everybody knows him. He had on his cloak a very interesting clasp, 2 rondels of lion's head and a heavy chain. And it was obviously good jewellery, beautiful jewellery. And of course, when I knew he was Haile Selassie, he was the Lion of Judah, wasn't he? So that explained that. He knew who he was and what he was doing. People liked him. He was very popular. People really liked him.
Living in exile, effectively as a refugee, meant the emperor was cut off from any sources of funds or income to support his family. As the years in exile drew on, the situation grew worse, resulting in the royal household beginning to run out of money. In his autobiography, the emperor wrote, "Our life in Bath was very hard. We had financial problems. The media had reported that we had taken enough money when we left our country, which was completely untrue. The fact that we were in serious financial troubles was in those days an obvious fact. Hoping that we would soon return to our country with the help of the League of Nations, we took an amount we thought was sufficient for a certain period of time, and even that was soon finished as we used it to help the exiles." During this difficult and potentially embarrassing period, the emperor called on the help of one of the closest friends he had made whilst living in exile, Dorothy Smith's father-in-law, Pop.
The emperor confessed one day that he was short of money and asked Pop if he could recommend a local jeweller. He'd already approached one himself as he'd wanted to sell some jewellery, but not been very impressed with the offer he'd received.
On the surface, everything was fine, but there was great difficulty in paying some of the bills. He had people to support in Egypt. There were people in London. One of his granddaughters was in a convent school in France, and her fees and her people who were looking after her had to be paid. And there was